Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to How to Create Children's Content for Today's Market. This is a Q&A session with Amy Betts, or our resident children's book publishing expert. So today we're going to be covering a couple of things in terms of content, how to create your content, and we're going to be touching on a little bit about marketing that content as well, whether you're publishing digitally or you're publishing physical books. So let's dive right in. So first of all, who exactly is Amy Betts? So Amy has worked as a senior editor at Disney and Scholastic, and she's also worked as an editor at HarperCollins and Simon & Schuster. So Amy has acquired and edited books written by the current National Ambassador for Young People's Literature, Walter Dean Myers, and by such award-winning authors as Sarah Pennypacker, Edwidge Danticat, Mary Pope Osborne, Daniel Pinkwater, and Cynthia Rylant. Now, in addition, she has edited the best-selling hardcover series such as Scholastic's The Magic School Bus and Dare America. And she has also managed paperback tie-ins for the Disney Channel. And, of course, throughout her career, Amy has edited almost every single genre of children's books, from rhyming picture books to standalone hardcover novels, to illustrated nonfiction. And I wanted to say, of course, Amy, welcome to this Speedy Publishing training session.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Colin.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. So we're going to dive right in, Amy, and we're going to start off by just letting everyone know that, again, this webinar is going to take place in two segments. The first segment, of course, is going to be content. We're going to be looking on roughly around 11 questions on how to create, content, stuff like that. And then we're going to touch a little bit on marketing. Now, the marketing, what we mean by marketing, of course, is discoverability. And we're only talking about discoverability. We will not be talking about conversions. While the two are, literally tied together. Marketing, of course, is pretty fundamental, because without having individuals coming to your sales page, then you won't have any conversion. So this is typically the first part of the puzzle that you want to touch on. So we're going to dive right into the content section with our very first question. So Amy, are you ready?
Yep.
Awesome. So our first question here is, what are your thoughts on the children's book market, and how has ebooks sold on tablets and e-readers affected the traditional sales of paperback and hardcover books?
Well, right now, ebooks are eating into traditional book sales at a steady rate. The accepted number this year, or in 2012, was 20%. Wow. And in 2011, it was 15%. So, it's continuing to grow. Okay. However, the growth has slowed down a little bit just in the past year or so. Where ebooks do have a larger percentage of the market is in YA, and we're seeing that to be about 50%.
Whoa, okay, that's a lot.
Yeah, that's a lot. Tween books have also had a larger percentage, not as high as 50%, but somewhere above 20%. And that was a surprise to publishers. They thought, they knew that the older kids would embrace e-readers, but they were surprised that, say 10, 11-year-olds were as much as they did. Picture books have not seen the same number go to e-readers. It would be under 20%.
Okay.
Publishers, something interesting is that publishers are encouraging novelists to write ebook-only novellas to get attention for their series. So those authors are having to write more, but they're not necessarily making more money. It's more of a marketing tool.
Okay, okay. Can I quickly ask you, just for our members who are not really cognizant of what tween books are, what exactly are tween books?
Well, so, that would be aimed at readers who are, say, 8 to 12. I mean, middle grade, younger teens, so younger than YA.
Okay, okay. Okay.
Something else I I wanted to mention is that in the last few years, I would say the last 5 years, there has been a major trend that middle grade and YA books are more saleable to traditional publishers than picture books. And, I think part of that is following the success of so many fantasy series. And also because the unit cost of picture books is higher than the middle grade and YA because of being full color. And so, and obviously middle grade and YA are selling better on ebooks, and publishers want to answer that need.
Excellent. Could it be, if I was asking you, Amy, so if it's a case where I had, it's easier for me, let's say I'm not typically an author, and I wanted to create stuff that was heavily picture-based, and I said to myself, okay, well, publishing digitally only would, of course, alleviate the cost of publishing on, in print, or publishing in paperback or hardcover, whatever the case might be. So typically, is it a case where we're seeing that those books as being picture books have just not, in terms of the number of sales, have just not gone up, period, across digital platforms? So that I'm thinking editors or publishing companies really and truly have stayed away from that because their entire business model looks on publishing both print and digital versus just publishing digital on a whole.
I think some publishers are doing picture books as ebooks, and I think they're available. It's just that they're not, the readers aren't as interested in them. Picture books on, and that would be more parents.
Right.
Parents, I think, are drawn more to picture books currently as a physical object.
Okay.
We talked about that, sitting down with your child. Right now, the ones who are doing that really grew up with traditional books, but say in 10 years, that may change,
Right. As those who are, I guess, would be YA now, typically become parents themselves, the way how they consume content, they're going to, probably give that e-reader or tablet or whatever that particular device might be in the next decade. They might just hand that over to the child, and right, and that kind of interactivity might be lost.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so typically then, ebooks, in your opinion, has basically, kind of, I wouldn't say killed off paperback or hardcover, but it's definitely having a serious impact on it.
Absolutely.
Definitely. Awesome. Okay, so let's jump into question 2. Okay, so question 2 is, what makes a good children's book, and what are the common traits of successful writers in today's market?
I would say for a good children's book, the main thing you need is a charismatic, compelling character, a character that a reader is drawn to and is interested in, and the book needs to have a unique voice. It has to sound different than everything else they've read, and a point of view. The author has to have a real connection to the material. I would say the common traits of a successful writer is that they need to be able to create a world in which the readers can believe, and the reader can lose himself or herself and escape from their daily life.
Okay.
And the story needs to have solid pacing and tension, and every word has to further the story. So there can't just be pages that go by that nothing interesting is happening. We need the story to keep moving, especially for young readers. I think adults are much more patient with a book that might go off on a tangent. And for kids, I think you need to keep that pacing there, on every page.
Right, 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 right. So definitely, in your opinion, then it's basically character driven, and the reader is drawn to that unique voice and a point of view, and the author has to have a connection with the material. But that whole concept of creating a world within a world, and you mentioned, of course, the pace of the particular book. Are we talking about specifically how the plot unfolds? My basic knowledge of how that sorry, that type of literature works, are we talking about the plot of the story, and then for children's books we want to make the plot a little bit faster, or how it unfolds to be a little bit faster?
So, I get very impatient when I'm at page 15 of a book and I don't know what's happening yet, and they're sort of spending too much time establishing the world and the characters, and well, where are we all headed with this? I want to start to see some clues about what the problem is going to be in this book.
Okay, awesome, absolutely awesome, absolutely awesome. And the traits that the successful writers have basically are the ones they're able to do this quite easily. Is that typically the case? In your opinion, is this something that someone can actually learn, or is there a particular kind of methodology that someone has to follow? Because out there right now, there are a lot of products that people can buy that basically give individuals an outline for a good children's book. Typically, I don't subscribe to them because I just don't think that they will work. Especially if an individual does not fully understand how to compile that piece of literary work. Someone has to have that kind of comprehension of how it should work overall, and then they would not need that kind of guideline. So do you think that someone has to kind of have it, or they don't have it, or is it something that you think someone could acquire over time?
I think to a point you can learn it. But I think if you don't have that internal passion for writing for children that you've probably had since you can remember, wanting to put a story on a page, or even telling a story verbally, I think it can come from that too. But lessons like you're talking about, they can help people and guide them, but I think unless you have that internal need to tell a story and you've got those characters living in your head, I don't think that kind of thing can be taught.
So it could be a little bit, intimidating, or could be basically impossible. In that sense, and of course, my company, we create children's content. But what we do basically is that we kind of outsource that in terms of acquiring that content. And I know you've done a bit of this. And what you've kind of mentioned is that for the most part, the acquisition of content has to do with, of course, the editor's role, or how the editor basically feels about that particular content. But I, as an editor, when I'm choosing that particular piece of content, a lot of other things weigh in terms of the factors. Would it be prudent to say that if I'm an editor, what we just spoke about in terms of, the character, the charismatic character, that unique voice, the point of view, if the author has that type of experience in terms of having created children's content in the past, and all those factors that you had mentioned before, these things that we could possibly spot in a story. And then we could then make the decision to say, okay, if we were taking 10 things that we would want to see, or 5 things that we would want to see in a particular book, that we could tick off and say, okay, well, point A, we've met this particular criterion, or, 10 different criteria that you choose from and say, okay, well, yes, this is all here, then I consider I could work with that book. So for the most part, for me then, being someone who wants to acquire the content, these would be things that we could definitely look on and speak to and choose and say, okay, well, yes, this might be content that I think would be good enough for me to publish through my business.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could do a sort of checklist, and
Excellent.
I mean, obviously, the book has to all hang together and make sense, and
Right.
you know, you can't just have some of those pieces. The story has to be there. So
Excellent, 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 excellent. Because that's what's in my head here. Because listening to you and basically what you had mentioned, those couple of things, and definitely, Amy, I know there's a couple more. So eventually we'll get around to that because you're with Speedy Co. So I know we'll have more discussions. But clearly, those things that you had mentioned would be critical things that you would want to see in a particular book, and it might be commonplace across most successful publications. And so we could use that as a kind of barometer or a guide to say, okay, well, this content might be, good to be published versus something else that might be all over the place, or as you say, might take too long or begin to unfold at page 20 and not at page 15. So
right.
awesome. Okay, excellent. Okay, so let's head on to question 3. Okay, so what are the best segments to enter into the children's market, such as educational content, which is typically, of course, juvenile nonfiction, versus entertainment, which is typically, I would suppose, is put into the juvenile fiction categories?
For me, this is all up to the author.
Okay.
You can't force your way. You can't force yourself to write nonfiction if what you really want to do is create a character, and vice versa. If you're passionate about horses and you have an idea for a horse book, you can't make yourself write an imaginary character. And so you have to think about what you are interested in and what you know about, and you can't force your way into a certain market because you think a book might be more successful. You have to have a greater connection to your content.
Okay.
And that's all I have to say about that. I mean, the author has to choose. The author has to feel connected to the age level, to the type of content, fiction or nonfiction, and you can't force your way into something that you're not comfortable with.
Okay, so let me ask you quickly. So in terms of something like educational content, which would basically, and let me not say educational, but let's say historical content, and juvenile nonfiction, such as the Dear America series, which was pretty much tied into historical content and American history overall. And was there an element of fiction in that?
Yes, it's historical fiction. So those were books. We signed up very well-known authors to write all of those books. We were very particular about who we would sign up. And those authors then chose a period of American history they were interested in writing about.
Okay.
They created a character who would live in that time. And we like them to be tied generally to maybe a war or, the Dust Bowl, some important thing that could be studied in schools, that might come up in your history unit.
Nice, okay.
So that meant we were going to have institutional sales, but we're also going to have trade sales because of the authors we signed up. Those books were tough because they had to be vetted by experts. We had an American history expert, and then we'd have a specific expert for that period of time. And, you have to make sure to get all the details right in historical fiction, or else certainly schools and libraries aren't going to use them.
And someone will call you out.
And that's true with any nonfiction book.
Right.
You got to be very knowledgeable and, possibly hire someone who's an expert to vet your content, to just
Awesome.
make sure there are mistakes or else, there's no use for it.
So that series being so successful, do you think it was driven based on the popularity of the author, or do you think it was based on that there was just a demand for that type of content there?
Well, girls love historical fiction,
Okay.
and if you think back, like even the Little House on the Prairie books, it's that same
Yes.
thing, putting yourself into another world, another time, and you have a character that you can relate to. And Dear America and all the series that were under that umbrella, there was one for boys, and then there were books for younger readers too, and those were all written in a diary format.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's another thing. Girls love to read somebody else's diary, right?
Okay.
And we made, and so the characters would be writing about their personal thoughts in a diary, and that's something that can really draw a reader in.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. So we looked on a couple of weeks ago. We spoke about, we had a lesson in what we call our Speedy Nuggets, where each week we provide something that is typically useful to our members. And we spoke about something called, of course, the tail of a comet. And when something does very, very well, a lot of individuals are interested in it, and then of course a lot of power readers and people, reading clubs take on to it. It creates, it has a life of its own. That, let's suggest Hunger Games or Harry Potter. Then what typically happens is that people can begin to write content that is similar to this particular book, and we call that book the comet, and then we like to ride the tail of that comet.
Yes.
Typically, we know that publishers utilize that strategy a lot, and it becomes very, very doable. So if I was a children's book, guru, so to speak, and this is the only thing I wanted to publish in, would it be, smart on my part to kind of, look into the market and see exactly what is typically going on, and then attach myself to the tail of stuff like that, and then look for content to acquire using that typical model, the character with the charisma. Of course, the reader is drawn to the unique voice, the point of view, and stuff like that, and then try and tie that in. But I'm very interested in that historical fiction, because that does kind of fit in, as you mentioned before, being able to reach out to two different markets, which would be, of course, institutional sales, and we have places like Keg that we publish to through Speedy Publishing Co. And they take a lot of educational content. So those institutional sales, of course, can also help. And you mentioned that diary stuff. That's very interesting. I had to write that down, because immediately what came to mind was, of course, the Diary of a Wimpy Kid. That definitely came to mind, and clearly that makes sense. So in terms of stuff like that, doing that kind of diary thing could definitely also be a comment that our members could definitely try and ride on. And I still think that's
another best-selling humor series, Dork Diaries.
Dork Diaries, okay.
So there clearly is a comment happening here with funny diaries, and but the important thing, if you're going to publish new content, on the tail of a comet, two things is, one, you have to have your own take on it. It can't be just a copy. There has to be some unique spin that you're taking on it, or else they'll just buy the original.
Right.
And, the second thing is, some of these comets leave really fast. And you might miss that whole trend. And then you've got a book that nobody wants because, I'm over the wizards,
Right.
So, you have to think about it like that too.
We spoke about that before, and I've spoken to our members about the lifespan of a particular book. And it depends on, I argued with a couple of people at BEA about this in terms of the lifespan of that kind of nonfiction or fiction, whatever the case might be, of that particular book. And trends, of course, as you mentioned, might have, a kind of negative impact if you're going to chase that kind of trend in order to publish. So I definitely see where you're coming from. But
Yeah.
a lot of that stuff might eventually go away, but then some things, like you mentioned, Little House on a Prairie, and was her name Laura? I'm trying to remember. It was Laura?
Laura Ingalls Wilder. Good job.
Right, Laura Ingalls Wilder. There you go. And stuff like Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn, stuff like that. I don't think the concept of the story never ever goes away. I think
Right.
what really happens is that it's reinvented for a different time. So what happens is that a lot of what we've seen in the past, or what I think what we've seen, is that when authors wrote, they wrote basically for their time in the past. And what we've found is that, in, of course, the 90s, the early part of 2000, 2001, 2002, what happens is that we either write totally fantasy or we go sci-fi. So it's all about the future. And I think that has been coming up from the 60s, where people think about the world, what it will be, in 1999. Someone was thinking about that in 1980. What would happen in the year 2000, and then the content was being produced for that particular time period. So that now becomes kind of important in terms of what it is that we're writing about, or how we're going to write about it. So I definitely do agree with you on that point. And historical fiction is definitely something I'm going to do a little bit more in terms of investigating on. And of course, that diary thing is definitely a hot thing to look on.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's head over to question 4. What type of content does really well in the juvenile nonfiction market, and what would be the best approach for an aspiring children's book writer to kind of get into the juvenile nonfiction market?
Well, again, here for nonfiction, it's write what you know.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be very well versed in the content. But as far as what is most successful now is, if you look at the New York Times bestseller list, all the nonfiction is branded. It's Lego Character Encyclopedia. It's The American Girl, How to Take Care of Your Body. It's Dorling Kindersley, whatever they've happened to put out.
Mm-hmm.
National Geographic, but it's, brands that are known, one way or another, either for their nonfiction, like DK or National Geographic, or,
Okay.
Lego and American Girl. I mean, obviously, they don't really have a background in nonfiction. I mean, American Girl was fictional stories about girls through American history.
Right.
But they've taken that brand and applied it to girl-friendly nonfiction, and they're very successful with that because people trust the brand.
Ah.
As we were talking about the other day, you can't just go out and write a book about elephants and expect it to be a bestseller because there are already hundreds of books about elephants. And unless there's some special twist on it, or you're able to slap a brand on it, I fear for the book's success.
Yeah. So typically, when a lot of our members have gone into stuff, and I personally have gone into stuff as well, in terms of, I would probably say, let's say, for instance, sharks. We would basically find content anywhere and then have that content rewritten to be original and unique, and then added, images of sharks there. Now, as you mentioned before, the sales would basically be relatively good, but it would never ever be high in terms of really and truly selling that well. Is it in your opinion then, what you would probably have to try and do is to create a particular brand that would typically work, and then try and build on that brand? I'm not.
Well, that's a possibility. You know, you
Yeah.
can do speedy nonfiction or whatever, and
Excellent.
but you have to also establish that brand as one to be respected,
Right.
and so and you have to market that brand. So um,
Excellent.
just creating a brand that has nothing behind it isn't enough. There has to be respect for the brand, and then maybe you'll have success.
Excellent. So I'm a Star Trek fan. I'm not sure if you're a Star Trek fan, and I've been watching Star Trek for a very long time, since the days of Captain Kirk, to Jean-Luc Picard. And one of my heroes, of course, at the time was, of course, Geordi LaForge. And I was so pleased to meet with him. I know his name is LeVar Burton, I think it is, and he has his I think his kids book program, or his children's program. I am trying to remember the name of it right now.
Reading Rainbow?
Reading Rainbow. Okay. So what I did in terms of exchanging cards with him is, what I thought is that Jupiter Kids, which is of course our imprint for children's books, and we have two other imprints, but I'm very, very keen on building Jupiter Kids. And we have a young lady who is a part of Speedy Publishing now, and she has something called Smarter in Minutes. And one of the key things, and I'll touch on it in our marketing segment, is that there are ways, as you mentioned before, to build that particular brand. And I think that what you mentioned is to make sure that your content would be able to touch on almost every single retail aspect that there is. So you mentioned institutional sales as a part of it, and of course just regular trade sales that are going to be also a part of it as well. So that is typically very interesting. It's definitely the direction that we want to go. So in terms of the best type of content for juvenile nonfiction market, would definitely have to be something that the author is, very familiar with.
Yeah, feels comfortable writing about, is going to get the facts right.
Definitely. Awesome. Awesome. Glad to know that we're on the right track. Okay, so typically the same question for juvenile fiction. Is it, because that's kind of different, right? It's not really knowledge based. It's more, how would you approach this particular question in terms of, what really does well in the juvenile market, and what would be the best approach for an aspiring children's book in the juvenile fiction market?
Well, what I find is that for middle grade and YA fiction, kids like to read very often about other kids facing some sort of major challenge and how they overcome it. Because every kid is facing some kind of challenge, but in a book you want something extraordinary. So if you look at the current New York Times bestseller list, there are books about kids with cancer, cerebral palsy, a facial deformity, and what these are realistic stories of kids overcoming extraordinary circumstances. And that is always appealing,
Right.
Then what we're seeing is a lot of books that are more fantastical, which can be stories about kids facing aliens or mythological monsters, something more along the lines of Hunger Games or Harry Potter, something fantasy-based. Something that isn't really going to happen to you if you walk out your door.
Okay. But
and here, we talked about the tail of the comet, and all these things have sprung, I would say, out of the success of Harry Potter. But like I said, they all have their own
twist. Excellent.
And they all have their own character that is special in some way, and the point of view and the unique voice, and these, you're not going to hit the bestseller list of the New York Times if your book isn't excellent in many ways,
Right.
Then there are aspirational stories, which are often more like soap opera type stories about rich kids. These kids living a life that if you're, a regular girl, And you can read about these glamorous teenagers in New York or LA who are models, or maybe they're in boarding school, or they've got a band, you know, like
Okay.
that fantasy and something you can aspire to. And this is, again, kind of a fantasy, but
Right.
it's more realistic. You know, this is happening to real kids in your world at your time, you know.
Right. Right. What I've seen here basically is with respect to something in terms of overcoming a hardship that a child faces. So you mentioned cancer and cerebral palsy or facial deformity or stuff like that. That typically, of course, I think would go very far, because that would resonate not just with the child, but more, even so with the parent of that child. And that parent of that child would definitely probably want to use that book to help to inspire that child and, give them hope, most importantly, because I know you had mentioned that, hope is very, very important in those particular books, right?
Right, and these books are not just selling to other kids with cancer. I mean, these are selling primarily to just regular kids who aren't going through something like that. But, like I said, every kid has some challenge that they're overcoming, whether it's their parents are getting divorced, or they're having behavioral issues in school, or they're being bullied. Like it's still a challenge, and they can, relate to these kids who have other challenges.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. And typically, the stuff like, the aspirational kind of stories that have to do with, of course, fantasy and stuff like that, does that basically involve conflict as well, or hardship?
Sure.
Okay. Okay.
You're the rich girl at boarding school, but, maybe you're being bullied, or the boy you like doesn't like you back, or, anything.
Anything like that.
There's always got to be conflict. Otherwise, there's no point. There's not a point for the book. That's when I'm talking about tension. It can't be you're just walking down the merry lane. Like, you need a problem in a book, or else the book has no reason for existing.
Definitely, definitely, definitely. Okay. And let me ask, okay, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say the other type of book that is popular is humor, like Wimpy Kid or Big Nate or Dork Diaries. Those are all really selling very well. And, I think there's always some humor that'll rise to the top. Boys like humor, reluctant readers like humor. So, librarians and teachers are going to direct those kids to books like these, just to get them to read.
So that could definitely be. I know that in the Square One classification, there is, I think it's number 6, if my memory serves me correctly. And of course, everyone who is hearing this, of course, this webinar, there's something known as a Square One classification, and we're going to be touching on that in the month of June, specifically for children's books in terms of a lesson. But in terms of Square One classification, I think it's number 6 that speaks about, I think it's easy reading. And you just mentioned that boys like humor and reluctant readers also like humor. So if I wanted to, of course, get into that market in terms of easy level or easy reading books, that would basically be a much larger band in terms of that particular age group, then humor would be the way to do it.
Well, it's one way.
It's one way. Okay. Awesome, awesome, awesome. And all of these things I could definitely tie in with the diary type. As you had mentioned before, it definitely would be a good combination. So aspiring stories or aspirational stories, the glamorous teenager, glamour fantasy, that is absolutely awesome. And you can just imagine, Amy, that I'm taking notes right now, right? So I hope everyone is also taking notes as well, because this is going to be important. Of course, we're going to definitely put out the PDF for this, so you guys can wait on that. But if you want to start early, please, start taking notes, of course. Okay, so let's move into question 6. So what age demographic, in your opinion, is, of course, the best to work with, and why?
And this is going to sound a lot like an answer to an earlier question, but again, I'm going to say, as an author, you have to identify the audience you're most interested in writing for.
Okay.
Based on your interests, your passions, and if there's a certain age that you remember really well, and you feel very connected to, oh, when I was 10, and you just have a great memory for when you were 10. That's probably the age you should write for, because you can get the voices right and the way 10-year-olds talk to each other. And, if you don't have any memory of that, how are you going to create a believable world and a believable character? So, for me, that's the answer to that.
Okay, so typically in terms of the age demographic then, in your opinion, it really boils down to the skill set of that particular author, or, what they're typically interested in terms of writing. But let me ask you, though, in your travels as an editor, when you were looking on the acquisition of content from that particular perspective, what would you be interested in terms of when you, of course, got in all of those manuscripts, whether or not they came in from a literary agent and or otherwise? Typically, what do you think would probably, or what has seen typically the best success in terms of that particular age demographic? Do you think it's tweens, or do you think it's toddlers?
Every age has its own successes, every age, because there's Dr. Seuss, and there's the hard issue YA, and everything in between, and there are wordless word books, for babies. And
yeah.
So, every age has its successes.
So, okay.
I was probably personally drawn to books for middle grade, young middle grade, for, say, 10-year-old, 11-year-old readers. I think that's when I really was reading a lot, as a kid, and getting into Judy Blume and Ramona, and, so for me, that's probably the age level I worked with a lot. But every editor is different. There are editors who very specifically acquire for toddlers or for YA. I happen to do everything, at various stages of my career, but yeah.
So excellent. So I like that approach as well, because typically a lot of our members kind of try and stay focused and say, okay, well, do I create content which is for toddlers and then try to stay within that market? But what we want to try and remember is that most of us who are in publishing, and when I say publishing, whether you're an author or whether you have your own small, publishing company, or whether even it's a medium-sized publishing company, one of the things that most people do not relate to in terms of children's publishing is that it spans from age 0 all the way to age 17. So, that is the band that, the AAP would, of course, consider children's books. So when we see that meteoric rise in terms of the number of sales, they're not just taking into account stuff that is between the ages of 0 to 5 or 5 to 10. They're taking in everything across the board, which is, of course, includes the tweens, and the young adults that are included in that. So stuff like Hunger Games and Harry Potter and all that kind of stuff, comes into play. So
well, and remember, those books are going to be crossovers. So Harry Potter and Hunger Games, I don't know what the numbers are, but a lot of those sales were to adults.
A lot, but then how do you judge that? Because in terms of how do they capture that data to say, okay, well, this is it's selling to adults, but then that's, it's still considered a YA book, right?
Oh yeah.
Right. So then, even then, that can.
That's called a crossover.
Right. Okay.
And
Okay.
sometimes, it really started with books like we've been talking about, Hunger Games and Harry Potter, where YA books, or middle grade books, were suddenly appealing to adults. And so, now the interesting thing is that some adult publishers will acquire a book knowing that it will cross over to YA. So it's interesting because, those readers are so fluid. When I was a teenager, I read adult books.
Okay.
But then when you're an adult, there's such a huge, so many people embrace YA, as adults now, and there's a huge trend for that. So it's just interesting how publishers go both ways, and they like a crossover book. Why not? It's more sales.
Exactly. So that could be, as a small publishing company, then if we're acquiring content, that could definitely be something that we could look on in terms of when we acquire that, is there that crossover aspect to it in terms of the content that we're definitely taking on board. Definitely, that's definitely something that we want to consider. That's very, very interesting. Awesome response, Amy. Awesome response. That's something I was not aware of. So for sure, I did not target. I looked on 0 to 17, and I was not thinking of that crossover, benefit that you can have in terms of the content that you're actually creating there, for sure. And that could probably that could definitely go into, again, nonfiction as well, because that's definitely important. So I've got that written down. So when we're looking on that juvenile nonfiction, institutional sales and stuff like that will definitely come into play. Okay, awesome. So question 7. What are some of the common mistakes that you've seen authors make that would lead to a poor experience for the reader, and hence, of course, at the end of the day, poor sales?
I'm going to go back to Tale of the Common again, because we've been talking about that. So one big mistake is trying to copy somebody else's huge bestseller and thinking you're going to get a huge bestseller because they did. Well, some books can be successful by riding the coattails of another book, but you have to have your own spin on the concept. Again, like I said a little while ago, you've got to have that great character, that great voice. And the other danger with chasing trends is that, sometimes they're over so quickly that by the time you write your book and it's published, it's too late.
Right.
And so, it's what I have to say is, if you want a successful book, it is vital that you write something you love, and you have a great character and a world that lives in your imagination as an author, and in which your reader can be fully enveloped, and believe in and want to return to again and again. Another mistake is not researching the market and finding out if there are other books exactly like the one you're writing.
Okay.
You don't want to do that. You need to always have your own spin. And, sometimes that's just illustrations that really stand out. But another problem is sometimes including too many personal stories that the author thinks are very poignant or funny, but that don't fit into the fictional story very well.
Right.
Kind of taking, if you're going to use a personal experience, and look, everybody does, but it needs to be woven in and really become part of the story. And mean something to the story. It can't just be something you, out of vanity, want to put in the story.
Oh, okay.
Another thing is, you make up your own bedtime stories for your kids, and your kids love the story about the unicorn that goes to planet Xenon, and so you decide to write a children's book about the unicorn and planet Xenon because your kids love it so much, but what your kids love is that you're telling them a story. And
Ah.
probably the unicorn and Planet Xenon isn't as good as maybe your...
I know you're trying to kind of sugarcoat that, but it is what it is, right? It is what it is. A lot of people,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
my kids want me to tell them a story, and I'm tired, and I just make something up, and I know it's not very good, but they just want you to talk to them, you know?
Right.
Yeah. And then I'm not selling myself here, but having someone, whether it's professional editor or proofreader, or even if it's just, I don't know, somebody who can really give you guidance on content and proofreading. Obviously, someone who you're not best friends with is going to give you more honest feedback.
Brutally honest.
Yes, and you need that. You need
Yeah.
that. And that is why you have to be brave to be an author, because you're going to get rejected and you're going to have criticism, but that is really just going to make you better.
And I agree.
You've got to be open to that.
Because I'm not one for I won't say I hate reading, but I'm not one for a lot of writing. I'm more into content acquisition, which is probably, I think I would probably say, and discoverability, and conversions are really and truly our strong point. Which typically, I mean, I won't sit down and read through an entire book. Even with movies, if I'm watching Netflix, I tend to fast forward sometimes. I'd probably get at least, I might get 25% of the movie. I had the opportunity to watch, I think it was After Earth with Will Smith and his son. And
well, that got terrible reviews. So,
it got absolutely terrible reviews, yeah, but I actually went through the majority of that movie pretty fast, just because I went to Rotten Tomatoes and saw that the reviews were not, typically that good. But you see, again, and I know you and I have spoken about reviews per se, and one of the things is that I have a friend, two friends actually, and they're also into publishing, Amy Harrop and Debbie Drum, and they have a software that actually goes out to find, individuals who have left reviews on Amazon, and they're able to, collect like their email address or that particular reviewer's website, and then it creates a particular email to kind of reach out to that person and then ask them if they would actually, review your book, which I think is pretty smart, yeah? I think is also pretty smart, and it's a very nifty tool that Amy and...
Are those paid reviews, though?
No, they're not sock puppetry.
Okay, well, they're out there.
Yeah, and typically what it does is it just finds those individuals who think are a very, very nifty tool, and I'll probably put a link to it below the video, so if everyone, I know you're big on reviews and that kind of stuff, so for me, I think of reviews obviously as an influencer in terms of discoverability. Well, not discoverability, but conversions. But I always say that at the end of the day, that the reviews are determined by discoverability and quality. So if an individual reads your book and it's really good, and it's really good quality, solid content, they would be encouraged to leave a review. And typically you have to get them there to purchase the book, and then once they purchase it based on what you have on that particular sales page, if the content is good, they will of course leave a review. And then what you want to do, of course, at the same time then is to get that ball rolling, kind of use something like what Amy and Deb have produced, pretty good software. I definitely like it, and you can actually, find individuals who have left reviews on books that are similar to yours, and then ask them to come along and leave that particular review. So okay, so typically then, bad mistakes or common mistakes people make: chasing the trend, almost copying, a bestseller, not doing their requisite research, trying to include too much of their personal stories, trying to think, of course, if they create that story and then their own child likes that story, then to assume that it's going to be the child is going to also like, every child is going to like that particular story as well. And finally, to ensure that someone is able to review your book, whether that's a professional editor or just someone who is going to be honest with you in terms of telling you exactly what's going on with that particular book, right?
Yeah.
Pretty much. Awesome. Excellent. Okay, so question 8. What format, that is paperback, digital, or hardcover, is always best to publish children's content in? Does it depend on the segment of the market, or does it depend on the audience that you're trying to reach out to?
It definitely depends on the audience.
Okay.
As I said earlier, at this point, 50% of YA sales, give or take, are digital. I will say a lot of those books became known through their hardcover, physical books. And then through word of mouth and reviews and good sales, then somebody says, well, I'm gonna buy the Kindle version.
Awesome.
But still, 50%, that's a huge number for YA sales being digital.
Definitely.
If you're writing a picture book or a baby book, I would say generally those are better in a traditional format, probably a hardcover or a board book. Parents are reading to those kids, and currently, those parents grew up with traditional books. They want to sit down with their kid and open a book. As we said earlier, 10 years from now, this may be very different.
Excellent. Yes, I agree.
5 years from now, it could be different. And then again, for tweens, a lot of those series for tweens, you might see 5 books published in that series in 1 year. So for me, I would say paperback is very good for that because those kids have only a limited number of dollars to spend.
Okay.
But as we said earlier, those tween books are selling well as ebooks. So, paperback or digital are pretty good for a middle grade book.
Okay, so typically then hardcover and board are for the younger age. I would probably say, I guess, 1 toddler, a little bit up, and then
up to age 7.
All the way up to age 7. Okay,
Sure,
awesome.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, awesome. Okay, very, very awesome. Okay, nice. So then, typically then, it depends on the audience. So we would look on hardcover. Basically would go up to age 7, and then above that we're talking about paperback and digital and YA and stuff like that. It's very interesting though that 50% of YA sales are in ebooks.
Yeah.
And that is one of the things, because in terms of trend spotting and what's happening in the market, Peter Hildick Smith from the Codex Group, they do a lot of I would probably say surveys and stuff like that. And while I'm not completely sold on the idea of such a small segment of the market in terms of the sample data, I always think that if you're not taking into account I'd probably say at least 10,000 plus people, I just don't think that you can really and truly be spot on. I know that they go through a rigorous thing in terms of choosing who these individuals are, but you can't be spot on. And one of the things that they look on is in terms of choice, of what a parent might want to read with their child, or what particular, as you mentioned before, crossovers in terms of young adults, what people who are young adults are reading more of. But sometimes when the real data comes out, and then you really won't know unless the retailer actually tells you per se, or that retailer is part of the AAP, and that retailer basically gives them that content. And even then, you don't know if all the information that the retailer is giving to the AAP is correct. You just have to kind of go off, then you hope it's correct. But the reality here is that a lot of that stuff would tell you that YA, it wouldn't point to 50% of YA sales are ebooks. It would not point to that particular. They would tell you that paperback is still, leaps and bounds above that. But if it's something to go off of, if 50, that trend is something that's going up, I don't think it's going to go down. I just think it's going to go up.
Right.
So then it would be very important at that particular point in time to think about not just the digital book itself for YA sales, but start thinking about enhanced books, because then that digital book as we know it as a PDF will almost the kind of PDF style will eventually be as old as paperback and hardcover. And then now it will become enhanced books that would have audio and video and stuff like that. So, right, so us knowing about that and then trying to get into that particular market is going to be very important. So definitely I've made note of that. So that 50% is definitely something to watch. And more importantly, we've been able to segment now 1 to 7, typically good for hardcover. And then, of course, above that is digital and paperback. Awesome. Okay, so question 9. As a children's book author, what are the best sizes to work with for physical books? In general, and this is a very, very general question, how would you approach this, Amy?
I would say don't be too creative. I would say, you know, what you see on the shelves, that's what works. And when you think about shelving in a bookstore or library, anything that's too small or too big is going to get lost because the big stuff won't fit.
Okay.
And the small stuff is going to get shoved around, and it's going to be a problem for the display. So, you know, often novels are 5.5 by 8 1/4 or 6 by 9 or something in that range. Picture books, you know, 8 by 10 used to be the big picture book size in the 80s, and now I would say it's bigger than that, but not too much bigger, you know.
Right. Okay. Okay.
It's got to fit on the shelf. You know, you probably don't want to go above 12 inches, even that.
Right.
That's pretty big. You know, maybe if there is some design reason for an odd size, like your book is about a giraffe, maybe that can demand an odd size book. But if you think about it, I mean, the same thing can be achieved with a gatefold inside that, you know, can fold out so, you know, the kid can get the payoff of the really tall giraffe neck, you know.
Okay, okay.
You know, be careful about being creative is what I want to say about.
So stick to the regular sizes, basically. If it's too small.
And for little kids, you know, you want a small book often. Like if they're going to be holding it, like it's a board book, you know, it's small. It's 5 by 5 or, but that's just for the little kid books. So you want something smaller like that.
Oh, okay. Awesome. So not too big and not too small.
That's
so
right.
right.
Just like Goldilocks, okay?
Excellent. Excellent. So yeah, so typically 8 by 10 is what most of, you know, our members who are publishing in children's content kind of look on as, you know, what to create.
For a picture book?
For picture books, typically.
Yeah, I would say that's kind of small.
By 8 by 10?
Yeah.
So
I would go a little larger than that. Not much larger, but 8 by 10 is a little small.
8 by 10.
But you know, you might it might be that the unit cost goes way up after that. So you know, you always have to look at that. Right.
So you look on the overall cost. And typically on the discovery side, it depends on how you actually attempt to go ahead and conduct your discovery or your advertising budget on a whole. Because a lot of the time these are print on demand, and depending on how you do it in terms of whether you're offering discount codes and stuff like that, you can basically sell it to an individual or a specialized market that will want that content and is willing to pay for that content at the same time. So it kind of boils down to your ROI at the end of the day. But then you got to watch your sales, because lower volume clearly would mean, you know, lower revenue. So That definitely is. But a little bit bigger than 8 by 10 is what you're probably thinking of in terms of a picture book, right?
If you want to fit in with what is being published today, yes. I mean, if it's print on demand, that's different. You know, people are buying it before they're comparing it to the other stuff on the shelf. So print on demand makes it 8 by 10 is probably okay, you know?
Okay. But then from a marketing perspective, and when I say that, if you look on it from that particular perspective, like we work with Lightning Source. So if we are, you know, within that particular size, I know most people don't really look, if they're buying it, they're not really looking on the size per se. They know it's big. Right, they know it's big, or it's large, but then they're not really looking on that.
That's true.
And that's one of the things, but you want to fit within that particular, what everybody else is doing.
Yeah.
And then to kind of assess exactly, you know, what's the cost differential at the end of the day, if it's going to make you that dramatically more expensive than a book that is 8.5 by 10, if you just go up a little bit more. And then you might price yourself out of the market. So then again, it comes down to our pricing strategy at the same time as well, which is also important. Awesome. But a little bit bigger than 8 by 10 is the typical size that's out there now. Awesome.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so question 10. What was unique?
Think about, you know, even novels are larger. Like those Harry Potter books are 6 by 9. It used to be that hardcover books were always like 5.5 by 8.25. So when you're seeing your novels are so big, you know, your picture books have to get a little bigger too. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I went back there.
No. Very important, because that at the end of the day keeps you within what the market is doing now. So you want to always remain in that, because you don't want to be, as you mentioned before, getting kind of creative, and then creativity takes you out of the sale.
Yeah.
So if you're not, you know, within what everyone else is doing in terms of those books that are selling, then clearly it might have a negative impact on you. Yeah. Okay, awesome. So, okay, what was unique about an author such as J.K. Rowling, and is young reader fantasy and sci-fi books a good market to get into?
So what J.K. Rowling did was she created a believable world that was fantastical and escapist, but she had very real human relationships and drama that readers can relate to. And so, you know, that was a special thing. It's different than your average fantasy or sci-fi, you know, having real human relationships. Again, you know, regarding fantasy and sci-fi, you should only write that if that is where your passion lies, and you can create a world where readers want to keep going back.
So that level of, in terms of, because one of the things that we talk about with what I know with J.K. Rowling is the overall concept of a series. Many of our members are not typically looking on that type of series or juvenile series, if my memory serves me correctly, that's what it's called. The ability to create that, and that's what I find so fascinating, the ability to create a world that is similar to the world as we know it, and then, of course, to simultaneously create that type of pseudo-world or different world that is different from what we know the world as it is now, and then there has to be some kind of catalyst or something that kind of, you know, sits right there that makes it different from our world. And then you still have that level of conflict and that level of similarity. It's an amazing feat to actually get it correct, right? It's pretty. To me, it's mind blowing, and I try to wrap my head around it, and it's mind blowing because I know Harry Potter he's in the world as we know it, and then he has this entire magical world with you know, at Hogwarts. and that's an entire magical world right there. But in that magical world, it still has elements that are related to the world as we know it. So he goes to school, he has his classes, he has his teachers, he has his lessons, all of that stuff. He has friends that are there. So it's similar to this world, so it's a whole different world, but he's still in some way attached to our world.
Yeah.
And that to me was probably one of the main things. I can't remember an author that was able to get that right, the way how she has done that, and then to give it that level of continuity.
And what you need to do in that fantastical world is there need to be special rules, that apply in that reality, and you have to follow those rules as an author. But in order to make it unique, it has to always stay within those rules that you as the author create for that other world.
Okay.
You can't drop that, because then your world falls apart.
Right. So then there are special rules to that type of world that you create, which is very, very key and critical.
Yeah.
That typically falls into the Hunger Games almost as well, right? So the kind of rules thing, that is what basically gets it done then.
Yeah.
Okay. Absolutely awesome. Absolutely awesome. So believable, fantasy, special rules, and creating a world that is related to our world to some extent. Okay, awesome. Absolutely awesome. Great response, Amy. Great response. Okay, so finally, my favorite question. Is it worth it to translate my children's book? What are your thoughts on that?
If I'm working at a traditional publisher, I say no, because if your book is originally published in English, but we sell the rights to Germany, that German publisher is going to translate it. Now,
okay.
If it is an electronic book and you are doing print on demand or something, obviously what Colin and I have talked about is that for not a lot of money, you can pay to have your book translated, and that will open up a larger market for sales.
Definitely.
With that one-time investment. So you have to weigh that small cost of translation, and if you think, if your book is about Mexico, probably you should translate it into Spanish, and
right.
And you'll see sales. So, it definitely depends on your book too.
For sure. What we do is we choose those particular classifications that are typically mixed in with a limited, amount of words and heavily pictorialized, because we say that a picture is worth 1,000 words. So we look on that type of content, and then we take that content with probably say around 1,000 to 1,500 words, and then we translate that content, because the cost to translate that is extremely low. And then we go into these foreign markets. So we create that content, we upload it, whether you're doing it to Kindle or whether you're doing it to Barnes & Noble. For us now, we have a much better opportunity, because going through Ingram Content, we can push that content globally. And that gives us a much wider market to reach out to, rather than just working with Amazon, despite the fact that, of course, Amazon is global. You have a company like Kobo as a retailer that reaches a lot of people who are reading non-English content, and that works out well for us because we're able to publish to those particular markets. But I will tell you that I did investigate a little bit, and major publishing companies will not touch your book if you have that content in a particular language that is currently selling in that particular market. They would want to be the first there, and then it would make sense for them to actually acquire the publishing rights for you, unless they can kind of lock down the market, so to speak. And I do say in that particular aspect, you are definitely dead on right. That is something that so I would say, if you intend at the end of the day to kind of go big on that single publication, to really get behind that, and it's not something that you're thinking, okay, well, it's an ROI, from an ROI perspective, what you intend to get as a return on that particular book, but you're looking even for that publishing, to sell the publishing rights to a foreign company. Before you begin a translation process, you would have to kind of speak to a literary agent and then probably try and see if you can get into one of those larger publishing companies that are in Spain or France or in Europe or anywhere on that side of the world or that side of the pond. You want to be able to look into that. And I agree with you totally, Amy, on that point. That can also be something that will definitely be worth looking into before you start translating as well. Okay, yeah. Awesome. Right, so I think that's the last question on the content side of it. And Amy, your responses have been absolutely awesome. I have learned a lot across the board. Yeah, there is a lot of stuff that I did not know. Typically, that diary thing, historical fiction is definitely something I'm going to be looking on. The ability to cross over in terms of when you're creating that content, to look on that, or you're acquiring that content, to look on the ability to cross over as well. And definitely the type of books for, juvenile fiction. Aspirational. It's just awesome. It's just a lot. It's a lot of content. This is a lot of information to digest. I'm going over my notes, and it's quite a lot. Okay, so let me dive right in quickly, in the interest of time, into the marketing segment. And this is basically this is our forte. This is what we basically do. So I'm going to take these questions quickly and kind of speak to the overall idea of discoverability and marketing your particular book. Because after you've created that awesome content, you've got to get people to come to your sales page, and of course, at the end of the day, convert that visitor into a buyer. So the first question is, how do I begin to market my children's book and, of course, improve the discoverability? Well, clearly, what you want to do is that you want to get out there in terms of getting people to see your book, getting people to notice your book. And there are several ways you're going to do that. Primarily, I like to start off what I'm doing with two things. Press releases, which is one, and of course, two, you want to start on the social media websites that people are on that are book reading websites. You do not want to start off by not going into something like Goodreads. You've got to get into Goodreads, and there's a simple particular way to do that. You just log into your Goodreads account, you apply for what is known as an author page. Once you have that, you add your book as well through whether you're using your ISBN or your eISBN or EISBN is what most people call it, and you get your book there. Once your book is up on that particular website, then you start pushing your press releases. And press releases go a very, very far way, because what it does is that individuals who are searching for things like children's content or a particular issue, as Amy mentioned before, which is, cerebral palsy or a facial deformity. I think it's a cleft palate. Is that what they call it, Amy? You know what that is?
Well, that could be one.
But
those are just the books that are right now on the list. I mean, it could be anything.
It could be typically anything. So yeah. The basic idea here is that if your book is about something like that, then you want to attach it. When you put out your press release, you want to be able to focus on something like that. So the idea here is that press releases go a very, very far way, but where those particular press releases are linking back to in terms of ensuring that you use your ISBN in that particular press release, tell people where your book is in terms of retailers, that helps to get the word out there. Ensuring that you're on places like Goodreads and you have, reading clubs that you can reach out to, those are good places to start. And for the most part, it doesn't typically really matter where exactly in terms of a classification your book is. The best thing to do is to get in front of the individuals who want to consume your content. And as Amy had mentioned before, depending on that audience and the type and the format of that particular book is going to be important. So if you, in terms of whether you're putting it in paperback or hardcover is also going to be important, because that will, of course, at the end of the day, impact heavily on your sales and your conversions, which are, of course, the end game of discoverability. So I would say, to begin, get your book on Goodreads. Once your book is listed on Goodreads, ensure that you have that author page set up on Goodreads. It's very, very simple to apply for that author account on Goodreads. You just hit a button and it will automatically put in an application. A couple of days later, you'll be sent an email. You've been approved. You ensure you add your book, and then you add your book to that particular author page, and then you start sending out your press releases, letting everyone know that your book is out there. And then, of course, build on exactly what that book is about. If it's juvenile nonfiction or it's juvenile fiction, try and ensure that you send out that press release to kind of target the right market. And that will, of course, at the end of the day, help in terms of getting your book that kind of publicity and notoriety to start with. And there are, of course, more advanced techniques that we talk about as discoverability in, your speedy nuggets and, of course, your speedy lessons as well. Okay. I should have asked you, Amy, anything to add to that?
I think you covered it.
Okay, awesome. Excellent, excellent. Okay, so question 2, what are the critical elements or a must-do to improve discoverability of my children's book? Now, if you're gonna put your book out there, there is specifically, I would think, one critical thing that you always have to do. And that has to do with your overall, A, your cover, and 2, the title of your book. Now, a lot of the times we try to be very, very creative in terms of the title of that particular publication. Short works best. What's easy to remember works best. Amy, stop me if I'm wrong here, but is that typically the case for most?
I agree. Yeah.
Excellent. So what's typically short works very, very well, and what's easy to remember works very, very well. So you want to be able to appeal to your particular market with that. And more importantly, there is a science behind cover art and cover creation. It's very, very weird, but if you look on a lot of the particular type of books that you have there, and we can look on something like The Diary of the Wimpy Kid. It's kind of like the notepad that's ripped, and you kind of see that rip on the notepad there, and it looks like that, and that's typical type of cover. That kind of resonates with a child. So, and it also speaks to a kind of diary-looking kind of thing that, as we spoke about earlier. So your cover art has to be able to sell your content, and your title has to be able to sell the content as well. People will never be able to read your book through the cover. So the cover itself is what kind of speaks to the individual before they even think of purchasing your content. Now, of course, there are other influences, as we mentioned before, which are like, of course, the reviews that exist for that particular book. We look on the 3 things and we compare them to typically movies. So we say, if you're into movies, people want to know, of course, who the author is, who the actor is, who the director is. So those are kind of, akin to who the author is. Once again, of course, the sample. So if you're putting out your book there, digitally, you have to ensure that people can actually get a sample of your book. What's going to be in that sample is going to help to, of course, sell the book, because they're going to look on it. So pretty much, as we had said, I wanted to watch, After Earth. It's a movie. I wanted to see the trailer. If the trailer looks typically boring, I'm not going to want to watch the movie. And it works the same thing if the individual gets a sample of your book. Now, if they're at the book stand and they pick up your book, you have to ensure that your formatting is correct from a print standpoint, that when they look on the book looks pretty good and the printing is done pretty well. It's not mass market, so to speak, that it doesn't look good enough to be purchased. So at that particular point in time, you want to make sure, A, your cover is really, really done well, B, your title also sells the particular book. So those are the 2 things that I consider critical elements that will help to improve discoverability, because people can discover your title as a list or drop-down list if it's on their computer when they search for a particular topic. They'll see your title, they'll see your book, they'll see the title of your book, and they'll see the cover, right? but they're also going to see 10 other titles, and they're also going to see 10 other covers. Your cover and your title must be good enough to stand out to that particular individual, for them to click on that particular link and then to be taken to your sales page. And then what happens on your sales page is now about conversions, which is something else that we will, of course, look on, and we've been looking on in Speedy Publishing overall. So the title and then, of course, your cover art are two critical, elements that you want to make sure that you get correct. Amy?
Yeah, I want to talk about the cover.
Okay.
Needs to be simple, not too many characters, 1 or 2, and you're talking about clicking on it, and the size of those thumbnails on Amazon or whatever, you've got about an inch,
Right.
an inch square, and you don't want it to look all muddy. You want a clear, simple, focused on a single element kind of cover, not a big sweeping scene with too many characters.
Excellent, excellent. It pulls me back to Harry Potter, which was just Harry Potter and the wand, and then the Harry Potter on top. And then, Prisoner of Azkaban, or, something like that. You didn't always see Ron and Hermione there.
No.
Right, right. So, again, you said focus in on one single character. Excellent.
Well, maybe 2. If it's a romance, you probably want 2 characters.
Right.
But, don't get it all crowded with characters and landscape and stuff.
Excellent, 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 excellent. Those are 2 of the things. Excellent. So yeah, I agree. So those are the 2 critical elements that we definitely have to get right to improve your discoverability. Okay, so on to question 3. So if I'm targeting young readers, what typically is a good niche to start in that will make discoverability a little bit easier? So for this particular question, I'm thinking if we're talking about young adults, what would be basically a good niche? I would probably say is romance. I think that young adult romance, now thinking about it, has a very good crossover element to it. If I'm wrong, Amy, stop me. But I think typically that young adult romance, to me, would probably be a lot easier to improve your discoverability. I think that there are a lot of sales going on there, and people are constantly looking for stuff like that. And I'll tell you why. That whole idea of Twilight started basically in kind of that young adult, kind of scenario, where this is a young teenage girl who comes across a vampire who is 400 years old, but she's a teenager and she's growing up, and it kind of, sits there and then moves into something like Shades of Grey. But Twilight, I know some, women who I know are very, 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 or were very, very, very in touch with Twilight. I couldn't understand why, but they were very, very in touch with Twilight. And I think that once you get into young adult romance, there's so much that you can latch on to, that because there's so many readers who are in tune to that, they're looking for content like that. And if you get your content out there, you will be discovered a lot easier than if you're doing something totally else. So because the market size, of course, or the demand is there for it, pretty much in my opinion, a lot more demand, or considerably higher demand levels are there for young adult romance. It will clearly make it a little bit easier for you to if you create some good quality content, following, as we mentioned before, cover art and your title and stuff like that, being in that particular way, to stand out and, of course, be discovered by the individuals who are actively seeking that type of content. So that's my opinion, and I think for the most part, I think we could probably find some empirical evidence to support that in terms of the numbers. We don't have that with us here, but I definitely think that that is what you would want to go into. Not specifically trying to trend, but that would be the market where you would clearly see rising demand or, you know, a high level of demand right now. So Amy, anything to add to that?
Well, I think young adult romance, and you know, but I think it has to have a little bit of an edge to it.
Mm-hmm.
It can't just be typical romance. I mean, like this with the vampires, right, in Twilight. So
Right.
there's a big hook there. It's not just your standard romance. And I think that's important. I think that's why people go to YA, because it's not your standard romance.
So it's the hook. So in terms of, for Twilight, you would consider the vampirical influence to be the hook?
Yep.
Okay, okay. So if we were to create content in that YA romance, so I'm not really doing that right now, but just to put that spin on it then, is that we would want to ensure that we put the hook on it. And we would have to have that hook.
Yeah.
Definitely, 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 definitely.
I mean, because if it's just a romance between teenagers, then it's a little creepy if adults are reading it. I don't think adults would really be drawn to that.
Okay, okay, okay. Then that would be basically on the crossover side of it. So,
yeah.
Right. So, okay, awesome. Well, I think Edward was 400 years old, but
Okay. That's true.
was he a teenager? Or I think he was over the age of 18, if I'm trying to remember correctly. But he was 400 years old, I think.
Yes.
Right. So definitely. Okay. So right. Well, yeah. That typically works. So I'm still sold on young adult romance, and then of course, as Amy has mentioned, of course, ensure that that big hook is there to kind of differentiate yourself from everything else.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So question 4. So what are the best retailers to work with in your opinion, and do you know about any specialist retailers? So I think we had mentioned that there are some specialist retailers in terms of children's content, but based on Amy's response, I'm going to kind of change exactly what I had thought of before, and what I wanted to look on was the more general that you can get, where you have individuals who are consuming that type of content are going to, whether it's going to be a Walmart or it's going to be Amazon, who is totally e-commerce, or you're going to find that specialist independent bookstore that deals with children's content only, and then target them. I've always been sold on the idea that you must, of course, engage the market on a whole, and then have that particular market then engage the retailer to find that particular content. So if you look on a company like Overdrive, and what Overdrive does is that, and we've spoken about this in terms of library discovery, is that Overdrive has something that allows you, when you search for a particular title, the individual goes to that library, they search for the title, and if that title is not in that particular library online, if the person is searching, you know, on the online version of the library, they have the ability to suggest that title to the librarian. So what would happen is that the library itself would not have that book where a patron can borrow it electronically. But Overdrive might have that content in their overall repository, but the library has just not purchased it. And what would actually happen is that the patron could then suggest that particular content, you know, to the librarian to say, hey, you know, can you go ahead and get my stuff, or can you go ahead and you know, bring this book into the library so I can start borrowing it. The reality here is, from a retail perspective, I think getting your book into as many retailers as possible, or how your content is created to get to that particular retailer, is going to be fundamental. So we spoke about Dare America as historical fiction. Then now you're not just talking about, you know, the ordinary trade book sales. You're now talking about institutional sales. So it now becomes an even bigger market that you can look on. You can still do something that's both trade and still do something that's institutional / educational. So then it should guide you in terms of how you acquire your content or how you create your content at the same time. So now, having heard this, I am now going to go back to the drawing board and then rework my ROI to look on i.e. crossover in terms of getting into more retailers to sell obviously more books. And then, of course, when I'm creating that type of, young adult fiction, so to speak, young adult historical fiction, so to speak, to try and give it that institutional educational edge that I can get into more retailers and hence, of course, more sales. So best retailer depends on, of course, the type of content that you're creating and your overall approach to it. So am I on point, Amy? Am I way off base?
I think you're on point, Colin.
Excellent.
Excellent.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay, so finally, and we are 20 minutes over, but it has been awesome. We wanted to talk about Amy's role at speedypublishing.co. Now, Amy is on with us as a consultant. And what Amy's role is basically going to be doing, what she's going to be doing, is that everyone who publishes through speedypublishing.co and everyone who comes through the Publish Direct system with us, we're going to have a buffer between every piece of content that comes in, or every manuscript that comes in. So if that hits, if you publish a book through speedypublishing.co, we're going to have, whether it's an intern or whether it's a consultant who has the opportunity to go ahead and look on your content and look on some of the things that we spoke about today. If those particular elements exist in your content, once those elements exist in your content, it's going to be used as a parameter. And so we're going to say, okay, well, look, is this content good? Is it high quality? Then we're going to take that content out, and then we're going to pass it along to Amy. And there's only so much that Amy can do, in a 30-day time period in terms of what she's doing. So she will then now be able to assess that particular content and then to send the feedback. And even if we then, of course, decide to select a particular manuscript and then bring that author directly into Publish Direct and then into, of course, one of our imprints, and we would, of course, take that particular book and start doing a lot with it in terms of publishing and marketing at the same time. And we would choose the specific imprint for that. So typically, pretty much, how Amazon would basically have their white glove program, and in terms of literary agents and gatekeepers, Amy is our gatekeeper. Or Amy is, I would say, our resident Dumbledore, who can basically tell us, if this is something that, fits within a particular, I would probably say, overall, if it's good enough to really and truly take the market, and what her opinion or take on it is in terms of her overall assessment. So, Amy, am I kind of on point here?
I think that sounds great.
Excellent.
I'm happy to be involved.
Excellent. And I'm so glad that you are involved. You are our Dumbledore for children's books right now.
With a better name than that.
Dumbledore. Okay. Well,
I'll work on it.
I'd probably say Hermione, because Hermione was clearly the smartest of the lot.
Okay.
Right. So you, I would say, are our Hermione right now, because definitely, as you mentioned before, children's books, we're big on discovery, and we're not so big on content. And I believe that there are three pillars to successful publishing, and I've said this continuously, and I know that some people disagree with me because I believe that it's a simplistic view. But I think the first thing is, of course, really, really strong quality content is the first part of the puzzle, the first pillar. The second thing is of course, distribution. I don't think that you can really say that you are publishing and you're successful in publishing if you don't have the requisite distribution behind you, or you don't have that push behind you, which is why we've aligned ourselves with, of course, Ingram, because Ingram allows us not just to push print, but it allows us to push digital as well. It allows us to reach a lot of retailers, both offline and online. And that's one of the main things. It's if you have the content out there, someone has to be able to get it, because then the final pillar of marketing, discoverability, and conversions will make no sense if you're marketing to someone who is in Australia, or that person in Australia gets the message about your book. A friend tells them about it, you know, and then they decide to go to their resident, you know, e-retailer or specific retailer, and they just can't get a hold of your book. So at that particular point in time, it becomes, you know, your marketing is very effective, but the distribution is ineffective. And as a result, it's typically a lost sale, because there is the demand there in that particular side of the world, but the person just cannot get their hands on your content. And that, for me, you know, is not something that makes sense. And a lot of people have to realize that there are people who are in the world that do not, you know, patronize Amazon. They don't go to Amazon to buy stuff. They go to other places. They go to, whether it's Texter in Germany, or you know, or they go to Kobo in Canada. So they're different places. Not everyone patronizes or uses Amazon as their source of content in terms of purchasing stuff like that. So we all have to understand that and ensure that we get our content distributed correctly. So Amy, you are our Hermione Granger. So gatekeeper, everything in terms of the content pillar side of it. And we want to have you on for years and years to come, especially when we start franchising out to other countries as well. So Amy, it has been absolutely awesome. I want to keep it. We have probably gone 2 hours now. Typically over half an hour over what we were supposed to do, but it has been so awesome. And Amy, I just want to, you know, say thanks. I know everyone is going to want to have you on for, I'd probably say, a Q&A eventually. I will probably try to, if I know your schedule is going to be really, really busy, but it's something that we can discuss and look into, you know, where we can have our members on and kind of field a couple of questions as well directly from them, because I know a lot of people are going to have questions even after this particular webinar. So okay, Amy, so we're gonna end the webinar now, everyone. Just remember, it's going to take a little time to, of course, transcribe this, but the transcription should be available, I'd probably say sometime early next week. It will be in the members area that you can actually, it will be right below the video, and you know, definitely, you know, take every opportunity to listen to what Amy has said here. This is really, really, really excellent content, and it will definitely help you in terms of creating your children's books for the future. So, okay, everyone, until next week, take care.
Thank you, Colin.
Okay, Amy.